I guess to kind of get us started, I kind of want to go all the way back to the beginning. So if it's 2021, you were born in 1921. Tell us a little bit about your young years.
Well, I don't remember it, but I was 1 year old. I was born on a farm in Cutler, California, near Fresno. My dad had a vineyard he put a down payment on, but he got frosted right away, and there won't be a crop. So he gave up and came to Los Angeles. He was a blacksmith in the old country, but evidently plenty of blacksmiths were migrating at that time, and he had to learn the shoe repair trade, and he sold used and new shoes, mismatched shoes and stuff he'd get deals on. So anyway, he tried to get me interested in a shoe shop, but I'd already discovered these gal jobs that there was two in my neighborhood, and I thought there's only two in the whole world. And we found out, no, if you want to see a lot of them, come up to Muroc Dry Lake several times a year. They have speed trials for top speed there. And man, that was fun to be up there because 100 cars were in line from all different parts of California and maybe Oregon or nearby states, running for top speed on these dry lakes, which get a little wet and water on them in the wintertime, but they dry up and they're flat as a pancake. And the best one was Muroc Dry Lake, which the government took away from us for Edwards Air Force Base. So anyway, that's the way we learned. In fact, the day the Army kicked us off the lake was a day that I thought, since I have about 11 or 13 to 1, I forget which, on my heads, I got to have a spark plug suitable, and the Kragars that had compression used the same size, 18 millimeter, and I forget the number of that plug. So I finally had the money to buy new plugs, and because before this I used the plugs you'd find behind the Ford agency, used plugs. So I don't want to miss on the top end. We got to go fast up there if we can. And I'll try out the brand new plugs. It was a cold plug. And it worked one time. Then I put them in a box and put the junk plugs in and drove up. And up there, we put in those new plugs, and they were way too cold because I had a bad location for the spark plug. It's supposed to be in a hot spot, we found out later, and it was in a cold spot behind the intake valve. So that was a lesson. We almost would have had fast time up there that particular year. So anyway, we learned from the older guys. That's the way I learned, and seeing all those cars in line and asking questions from the guys. How'd you do this, and how'd you do that, and where'd you get this part?
Can you remember, Ed, any of those early guys that really had an influence on you? I will talk about Ed Winfield in a minute,
yeah.
But some of those old hot rodders?
Well, Winfield was unapproachable, it seemed like to us. But finally someone did go to see him and buy a cam and came back with information, technical information. What was it? It was volumetric efficiency. Boy, that sounds good. What does that mean? And we finally realized you have to fill the cylinder all the way to get 100% volumetric efficiency. I don't know if we knew it at the time, but later we learned the higher the speed, the harder it is to fill the cylinder all the way. And then we didn't know it, but later on you can get over 100% volumetric efficiency with certain little tricks and so forth. So I finally got to meet Winfield when I got a job and I had some money to buy a cam. I had bought for $65. I had bought some heads that would make a flathead V8 into an overhead valve V8, but it wasn't quite right. It was the intake wasn't in the head, the exhaust was in the head to make it run cool. About 3 different companies had done this, and the real reason they ran hot was a bad fuel distribution, which if you had 6-cylinder inline or 8-cylinder inline, you'll see that distribution tube in the block to give it equal air, oil, or water to each cylinder. That was the real reason, I understand. Well, anyway, I had those. They were low compression, and I heard that high compression gives you more power. So I've had them filled in, had them heated almost red hot at the welding place, Arco Welding, and they filled in the combustion chambers. Now I had to grind them out, so that's why I went to Winfield to order the cam. And how big should this passage be between the intake valve and the bore in order to breathe? And he knew exactly what size. He said 9/10 of a square inch. And I used to wonder, how does he know that? But anyway, he took pity on me and sold me his cam grinder he had made in about 1933. And before that, he had started by grinding the cams on his 1-cylinder motorcycle, all by hand, which you can do, and they work pretty good sometimes. I was fascinated by the machine, and after the war, it was when I decided I'd like to try it. So in later years, I started to make money, and so we decided, why are we wasting time not visiting? Winfield is living in Las Vegas now. On the way home from Bonneville, why don't we stop and see him? So later I started visiting him every 6 weeks or so. And later then I said, I should start paying him, because he's telling me all about things in the early days of racing, things that you should know.
That had to have been a really wonderful thing, because I think you told me that when you first met Ed, there were a lot of people kind of kicking around his shop, and he was a busy guy, so he didn't really pay too much attention or give any of the young guys attention, but he liked you for some reason.
Well, some guys wanted to go fast, and they didn't want to know all the details about how the engine works or anything. Just make me a can, makes me go fast. I got to beat somebody's, there's a grudge race going on. So those guys didn't get much attention. They just put their cam through the door and come back with the money and go. But if you were building something funny or special, he would be glad to look at it and help you and tell you what you might be doing wrong, he would help you.
So this is
glad to help you.
This is a picture of our friend Ed, and so would have you come in that back door right to the right hand side of that picture?
That's the machine he had built, and about 1933, you buy a regular cylindrical grinder. In this case, it was an internal grinder he converted, and he did all the offie cams and stuff on there. Well, when the war started, he had so many orders. After the war, he had so many orders, he couldn't fill them. This machine wasn't fast enough, so he bought a brand new machine from Landis for about $15,000 that ran automatically, and it's the same cam, the same grinder the factory uses to make cams. And it would make a cam maybe in about 3 or 4 minutes. But he had to make the big master cam for it, which he was able to do. And so he was able to sell a lot of cams back east here in the Midwest and back east. He filled the bill order out with that machine.
I was going to rewind a little bit for you, Iski, and we're so proud to have your car here. It's just such an honor. Here it is. tell us a little bit about the history of the car. It started out with your friend, Mr. Ethan. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. We walked home from school together, and I found out his brothers had a Model T, and he taught me the firing order, 1, 2, 4, 3. And I thought, gee, I'll remember that, but why isn't it 1, 2, 3, 4? But I'll find that out later. So little by little, I learned about the Model Ts, and that was simple. And you could buy one for $5 or $10 and drag it home, and the older guys would help us get it running, and teach us, Now this Model T, John Athen, my friend, bought it from our Swedish friends, and it had a Rajo Model T engine in it. That frame of this, the frame, and it had a Franklin axle with elliptic springs in front, and then John had converted to a 32 Ford front axle with brakes, with front wheel brakes for the first time. Well, finally, the Model Ts, I gave up on the Model Ts, and because you could now go to the wrecking yard, and I bought a late 36 V8 engine for $65 with cracked valve seats. Now, that'll be okay. It looked like a racing engine to me. And by God, they never leaked or anything. And now we had a pretty fast car for its day, yeah. So that's a little 3-car garage made into a 1-car garage. And boy, that exhaust pipe being big like that, it went boom, 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 boom. Boy, it had the greatest sound when you put too big a pipe like that. That's a great sound I had, that Model T, the old Roger. So I bought that from John. He blew up the engine. The flywheel came off the back of the crank, and he sold that. And I bought that, and that's how I got started with this, and putting that V8 engine there.
Did you go through multiple V8s? I think Joe was kind of wondering if that was still that same 36 motor, or before you put the maxi heads on, did you switch it over to a 32 motor at that time?
And then, a funny thing, there was no overhead valve V8s, although Chevrolet had built one back in 1916 or somewhere. And so we heard about these heads for sale, made by Maxi, M-A-X-I. And his name was Rex A. Head, and he was in charge of parking cars underground garage downtown L.A., and he sold us those heads for $65. Oh, we were excited. And we heard high compression is going to help, so we heard about milling and filling heads and stuff like that. And after the convention chambers were filled with cast iron while they were red hot, Winfield told me how big to make the passage between the intake valve and the cylinder board so that you'd get full breathing. And and he showed me his machine, which fascinated me.
And this picture, Ed, is that you guys getting ready for the maxi heads right there?
Now, I had to plug the old exhaust ports, and I thought, gee, maybe I can pour lead into the old exhaust ports, and the push rod's going to come through there to operate that exhaust valve. And by golly, we turned the car on an angle like that, so that the heads were flat now. And then when it cooled, by golly, they shrunk and they were loose. But I found out by hitting them with a hammer, they swelled up again. And I needed a special head gasket, but I used the flathead gasket and bought some material that's like gasket material, and it filled in the old spot, and it worked pretty good for a while. later on, we had trouble. But anyway, so we decided here to, let's really, while it's on an angle like this, let's really make believe it's an accident. So that kid there turned out to be, Herman there, turned out to be a diesel man working for the big diesel companies and stuff. And that's my brother Luther on there, sleeping in there. So that was just a joke deal. The surprising thing is when you get caught up in this hobby, you learn from the older fellas. And the first thing you know, you're of help to the other new guys that are coming in. And don't be surprised if they got more talent than you and pass you right up, they go right to the top. Sometimes, some of them, they do. Yeah,
and your car, Joe was kind of mentioning, that set of maxi heads must have worked pretty good, because what did it do out at the dry lakes? It ended up going pretty fast, didn't it?
The what?
Your maxi head hot rod, it went pretty fast at the dry lakes. What was your top speed out there?
Well, this one was those maxi heads, went 120 finally up there before the war. I found out the exhaust is not important. Don't worry about the exhaust getting out. You don't have to have more timing on your exhaust or all that stuff. It gets out. And like Winfield, I told him one day, on the dyno, we found that a small block Chevy, they're headers, but they come together for 4 inches. And if we run it that way and don't put a 20-inch extension on there, we lost 10 or 15 or 20 horsepower. Yes, you always need a little back pressure. Oh, really? Yeah. I think we're calling it back pressure for simplicity, but it's evidently a lot more complicated than that. But in a lot of cases, you'll find that the neighbors complain about the noise at the racetrack, and they have to put on mufflers, and they go faster sometimes.
Did you have a feeling that hot rodding was going to explode and turn into the nationwide thing?
No, we were very surprised. Oh, in fact, I think before the war, it would be hard to make a living making speed parts. But after the war, the money loosened, really loosened up during the war and after the war. And my ambition was to make 5 cams a day at $20 a piece labor on those V8 flathead cams. And after about a year, I was making $100 a day labor, yeah. And by golly, Hot Rod Magazine got started. Before that, we had no communication at all. And I went partners with Anson, who was Jack Andrews, our old mentor from the old Model T days, and Louis Center. And I knew, you've seen the Davies manifold like this, Well, we knew him. He was a pattern maker and a hot rodder. And he'd already made patterns for a dual overhead cams on the V8 Ford Flathead.
Is that in this picture
You've got
right
it
here,
here,
Ed?
probably. Oh, there it is on display. He let me bring it here to the show. And we attracted a lot of people that way. And Rex Mays and another famous race driver came to see what the kids are doing now. Well, they used to do it. These guys were kids originally, too. And they would all admire that engine there. You've got it here, I think.
Yep, we have a Davies overhead cam like that, but I think this is one of the only historic pictures we have of it. And
I built that machine after the war because I'm from apprentice machine shop experience, and I got to make the master cam to try out the machine. So I look in the book, and it says you have to have a clearance ramp. I'm going to leave that off because I just want to make the machine run. I want to see it run, work, and go back and forth. And so I made a fast action cam, and by golly, a kid in the neighborhood was building his first V8, and I had built something before, so I helped him, and he bought a cam. And when he got it running, I could hear it coming from a half a block away, the tappet noise. Boy, I was ashamed of that. But it's the only cam I had right now, but I'm trying to sell them. If you went to a speed shop to try and sell your cams, you couldn't know anything about cams because you're just a kid that races at the dry lakes. You couldn't know anything about cams. It seemed like you had to have a reputation. But Anson there, they were bold. They would sell them anyway. And so a guy was building a boat called Scheming Demon, a flathead, flat-bottom boat. And I think I gave him the cam free. And when Jack Andrews got it running, he was hitting the throttle, and the drive shaft disconnected, and it's got a light flywheel and stuff. And he's goosing it and running it, and it's peppy, you know. And, oh, this thing's really hot. My cam is in there, and my cam is good. You like, really? Can you really tell? It's in neutral, and there's no drive shaft, no weight. But he knew flatheads, because that's what he was running now. And then NASCAR called. And it wasn't the hottest team or the most experienced team in NASCAR. They're running flathead Ford V8s, and the bodies are usually 37, 38 year flatheads, and they're running on dirt tracks. They called and heard if they went to California and bought a cam, that would help them go faster. And they didn't know the simple terms we had of semi, three-quarter, full, and super. And then this one I called the track guy because it was so noisy. It was only good for the track. So they called up and bought 2 cams by airmail at $20 a piece. And I said, do you want those on good used cores, which are $2 a piece? Oh, no, we want new cores. Well, they're $7 a piece, new. Oh, that's what we want. Oh, boy, these are high rollers back here. And, you know, this was not a hot team with a lot of experience, but evidently they went better than they ever went before. And some of the other teams found out where they had got the cam, and I got more orders. And later on, Bob Osiki came from back east here, and he told me why they were ordering. My cam would actually pass cars on the track and work your way up to the front. It had more torque or mid-range, and I discovered that's by accident. And then, and actually I found out the industry needed me. I was actually needed, much to my surprise, because all I wanted to do was make $100 a day. Then the funny thing is that your customers give you some pretty good ideas sometimes. So later on, I meet Scotty Finn, who's a real good body man, a fabricator. And he came out from Oklahoma and started a speed shop. And he says that he taught Jocko, who was a famous port grinder, how to port cams. And I didn't know if that was really true or not. But anyway, he'd come down at night to talk. And he had built this chassis for a drag racing car, top fuel. And Yegel Brothers Cadillac, they'd put one of their Cadillacs in there. Went pretty good. And Nick Arias put a Buick, not a Buick, a GMC six-cylinder overhead valve engine. It went pretty good, but not really outstanding. So he got a little disgusted and said, I'm going back to Oklahoma. And I said, well, give me your address, and I'll write to you, maybe once in a while. By the way, when he came, he talked with authority, by the way. And he had a cigarette that would hang on the bottom lip and still stay lit. And when he wanted to take a puff, he could flip it up and puff it and let it hang again. It was wonderful. And he talked with authority. And you couldn't help but listen to him talk about hot rods and his ideas and all that thing of what he found fault with how Wally Parks was running NHRA. So, Iskey, why don't you make a 5-cycle cam? You know, I had heard of a 5-cycle washing machine, but I never associated that with the engine. But now he's associated with the 4-cycle engine. And I'm thinking, gee, that sounds so good. God, you could be famous. How could you add a cycle to the engine? And gee, I'm going to hold on to that. Now, how, if you ever use that term, how could you substantiate it? And I said, well, it would have to be the overlap period. Intake, compression, power, exhaust. We'll have to screws in right after power, exhaust. Well, or is it between the intake and the exhaust? Anyway, it's got the overlap period. So I held on to it until the right time. And finally it came. Bedwell bought that car from Scotty, modified it a little. Cook was the driver, had just lost his ride with one of the Speed Sport special cars, which were very fast, the rear-engine roadsters, you know. And they were on the right track because all they had to do was extend the wheelbase out further, and that was the new dragsters. But Hilborn's fuel injection worked good at wide open and maybe at idle. And in between, it wasn't perfect. But they had ways of getting around that with bypasses and this and that, tricky ways of doing it. So how did you go with your dragster with the Hilborn injection at the Chrysler? Well, it blubbered off the line and was rich, but boy, it cleaned out almost at the end of the track and really pulled hard. What are you going to do next time? Run. Well, we're going to lean it down. And then you'd come by an hour or two later, and how'd it do when you leaned it down? It pulled real good. Oh, we burned pistons on the top end. I said, well, you're going to have 2 bypasses and switch from one to the other maybe. And they invented that later. They did have that.
You were obviously one of the first people to really get involved with advertising your logo. The T-shirt thing was a big deal.
Oh,
but then later with Don Garlitz, too, and kind of what you did with him. Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, that's just kind of some genius.
Well, the first Bonneville is going to take place at Wendover, Utah, where John Cobb is at his records, over 400 mile an hour. So Norm Lean and Doug Harrison, we're going to go to the first one. Wally Parks and Pete is putting it on, NHRA. And I give them $100 tow money. And they stopped at Las Vegas and claimed they made a little more money. I don't know if it's true or not. And they said, we're going to dress up the crew a little bit. We're using your cam. And they went pretty good, about 100 miles an hour. And they came home. You're going to dress up the crew? What are you going to use? I don't know, we'll think of something. And they came back with a T-shirt with my logo about 4 inches in diameter, Where did you have this made? We had it made in Hollywood. And he gave me the address, and so we went up there and we had it made much bigger. And we gave them away at Bonneville, to the entrance for a while, and we sold some too. And some people think we invented advertising on T-shirts. Someone might have done it before us, but it seemed like we were in at the beginning anyway, putting silkscreen information on T-shirts. I met a guy named Jim Fueling. His actual real name was Fueling, like fueling a motor with me. And he said, we can do work for you. I said, all right, if you say you've got a dyno over there and your own little Chevy engine, why don't you test some of my cams to see if the results we get on a dyno are true with you. But every time his engine would break down and nothing would happen. But anyway, Scotty Fenn again. Iskey, you got two lobes up there, intake and exhaust. Why don't you put another little lobe in between? Ha, 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 yeah. Wait a minute. Maybe I could put a lobe in between, a tiny little lobe. But where can I do that without hurting anything? I don't want to hurt anything. So I finally figured, I could probably put it after the exhaust is all gone, and we're down near bottom center dwelling down there, and I hope it's all gone, and I can crack the intake valve open a 1/16 of an inch and close it again real quick, just to show that I've got that little bump in there. I don't want to hurt anything. I haven't done it, though. I'm just talking about it. So I said, maybe I ought to patent that. I said, what if I run it on a dyno on a small block Chevy with and without the bump? See what, and then can I get the patent? Maybe. So we did, and we ran it with and without the extra bump, and you couldn't tell it. I learned something there. He says, I don't think you've got anything, 1 or 2 horsepower plus or minus, because the dyno is not that sensitive. I don't think you got anything. And you're not going to get me the patent? No, won't work. It doesn't work. Well, maybe later I could get it to work. No. So I said, well, I've heard of public domain. I'll make it public domain. Maybe somebody someday will make it work, and then they'll have to mention my name and give me a little credit for playing around with it anyway. So I put it in the magazine and sold a few, and then didn't do help or hurt, so I let it quit. 20 years went by, and Jim Fueling called again. And he says, I want you to make me some pulse cams. I called it 3D cams, but he's got a new name. And he explained what he wanted. I says, hey, I've made those before. In fact, I tried to patent that. And he said, I've got the patent, and all the cam grinders are going to have to pay me royalties on this. Oh, my goodness. I said, you know what, maybe I got you shot down. I made it public domain. And I didn't know it at the time, but, I offered to make it for them free if they will give me my rights to make all I want free. But the other guys will have to pay royalties. So I mailed them an ad the way it appeared in the magazine, and never heard from him again. But I didn't know that already in his patent, he had put down there, and you have to do this. If you know somebody's worked on something on your patent before, you have to mention it. Otherwise, it might ruin your chances in court later on. And he mentioned my name Iski tried to make this work, but couldn't make it work. But I made it work. I made it work. So,
what a good buddy.
Then some more time went by, and I said, I'm going to go back and see Jack Engel. I like Jack Engel. He had built his own cam grinder also and was a machinist, you know. So as I'm visiting, he's a nice guy. He says, by the way, I'm doing those pulse cams for fueling, you know. Oh, you are? Oh, I can see why he came here. He could be an inventor here, but at my place, he can't be an inventor exactly. So, hey, let's face it, they don't work, right? They don't work, right, do they? He says, well, he does admit it's cosmetic. I said, I should have thought of that. Cosmetic. You can sell stuff that's cosmetic. Even if it don't work, it's cosmetic. My goodness. So I learned something there. So he'd gone to Engel. Yeah, that was it.
Oh, that's funny.
But now I'm beginning to think. And at the PRI show, I decided one day I'll have some fun. I'm going to say that maybe I can open the intake valve while the piston is on its upstroke. Well, how could you get away with that? Well, I opened that little thing for a 1/16 of an inch down near bottom center. Maybe could the exhaust going out suck the intake in? If it was the right pipe and the vacuum behind that pulse of exhaust going out. So I made it believe that this is I learned the word premise, dealing from a false premise. And I like that. I said, oh, I see. You think it works because of this, but it's really working for something else. But anyway, so we had some seminars where we talked about that, and maybe you could have the intake valve wide open at top dead center and really get good breathing. Of course, on an overhead, that's hard to do, unless you got a special combustion chamber. But at a flathead, nothing to stop and open the valves anytime you want. It might help a flathead.
Oh.
So that was just, sometimes I would write things in the ad, and I was always afraid some engineer would shoot me down and make fun of me, you know. But by golly, what it is after we were making quite a few cams, why you get the hang of it and so forth. There aren't people that have a broad experience of working with many engines on the cams. So that's why, in a way, you could get away with bluffing in this business, you know, because no one can prove you wrong exactly. It would be hard to prove you wrong sometimes with your ideas or your premises, you know. It's Smokey Eunuch. You know, like Smokey was a sharp guy, but there's a lot of other sharp guys that have made a success, but some are bluffing. And some might picked up the lingo, and they read the magazines and know all the tricks to what to do to the engine, but they might not really understand the engine that well. So when I visited him, he tested me, and I realized he tests other people too. That they don't know they're being tested because they're supposed to know, but he's trying to find out if they really know. He says, Iski, how do you get the engine to use more fuel? I said, well, you could richen it up a little bit, but maybe it wouldn't like it and wouldn't draw as much fuel. Oh, you'd have to get more air through that engine before you could use more fuel. And then he didn't say anything, but I think he was testing me, see? Yeah.
Well, I'm interested in how the cam wars got started. You talk about other cam grinders and advertising. How did the cam wars start?
Well, it started because there was competition. I guess one of us has started bragging, and then and maybe they'd win a race and say they had the best of everything, and pretty soon, so others decided they'd be able to advertise if they've got some wins, and stuff, and like one of our stiffest competitors was Howard Johansson. He used his front name for his can company instead of his back name. He should have used his back name because Johansson is a famous Swiss company that makes Joe blocks. They're precision Joe blocks. So I went to his funeral service, and they told me, oh, he thought this was great for business, the way we were having wars and fights back and forth. Oh, I thought he was mad at me. No, he thought this was great for business and stuff. Oh, if I would have known that, I said I would have come over and visited, and I'll let him get the best of me this week, and then I'll get the best of him next week, and we'll orchestrate it a little bit and have fun back and forth. But
Iski, one thing Joe and I have in common, my friend over here, is we both worked on the telephones at Speedway Motors, and we had to sell parts and answer questions about parts and how they're supposed to work. And I'm looking at this picture of you here at your desk, and you're on the phone, and somebody asked you yesterday, how'd you start smoking cigars?
Oh, yeah. Well, remember, at that time, it was $3 to make a call from New York to California. So the guys that wanted to order pistons, while they ordered a cam from me, would you mind relaying this order for Jan's pistons? And pretty soon I'd have 2 or 3 of those that do it. And I'm getting nervous. I got to get that phone call in the day before it gets dark. Oh, my goodness. And I'd get nervous. So at lunch, they had cigars for 25 cents. Boy, they were good cigars. You can't get those anymore. And by golly, that calmed me down. I didn't want to drink. I didn't want to start drinking, but that calmed me down, and it really did. It helped. And that's the way I'd be busy like that. Giving advice to the new guys, guys that could teach you something later on, too. So that's the way it was. A new thing, there are not enough experts. There's not a lot of experts yet in this, especially the speeds and accomplishments are getting pretty good in hot rodding. And there's no one that not many people that know. It's a new thing, yeah. So you can do a little bluffing too sometimes, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your experience with World War II.
All right, this is Air Cadets, and we're sent to college because they're not ready for us yet. They got so many guys in training that they postpone. We go to college a little bit and learn a little physics. And Eastern Oregon College of Education, LeGrand, Oregon. We're there. And this is when I got on leave. I went to Earl Carroll's nightclub. And these are all my friends there. Yeah, the Narrans there. And yeah. All the young guys wanted to be fighter pilots. And I was one of them. Boy, they got to be careful. They wash people out. You don't make it through. So I'm going to toe the mark and try harder. So we haven't sold out yet. I got 5 hours in on the primary trainer, and I haven't sold it out. But those young guys, they're going in at 17 and 18, they've already sold it out. Because my instructor's chewing me out all the time. Loosen up on that stick. You got a death grip on that stick. I think it was okay if we did a spin or a stall or something where your horse is around, but straight and level, I am trying to make it better by watching the compass and this and that. I don't realize it though. And he's telling me you loosen up on that stick. I wish you would have told me one finger. That might have helped. So he got me airsick the day before, nauseous and airsick from chewing me out. I couldn't talk back because I'll really be in trouble. Now it's the next day, and he's griping about me again. And we're flying over in Scottsdale, Arizona, airfield. Now fly around this farm here. Oh, I'm already nauseous from him chewing me out. Boy, I didn't realize I was such a sensitive person. Such a sensitive. Why are you nauseous and airsick? But he got to me. I don't know how I did it. I realized, you're through. You were sick. If they found out you're getting airsick like this, they're gonna wash you out. And I said, I give up. I really do give up. I'll go ahead and fly around this time, but I can't put any more work into it because I don't know if I'll throw up or I'll just get sicker yet. I'm very nauseous. So I practically had my eyes closed and I just make this turn and another turn. That's it. Now you're catching on to it. I'm like drunk. I might as well be drunk. That's what he really does mean. It flies itself. Don't pay so much attention and worry, and don't try and make the airplane fly better than it's flying. So there were three of us weak students: Iskey, and Heller, and another guy. And we all got put up with a kinder instructor. And this kind instructor, I didn't know, but he told me later, when you were in primary flying school, we were told to get everybody through we could, even if they weren't very good. We were disposable in a way, see? So now I've graduated out of the primary trainer on a BT-13 medium trainer. We're touch and go landings. And they told me, the instructor said, now if you want to set the trim for the glide in, you can, but remember you got to take that off because the nose will go straight up on you when you put the power on again. That's okay for the glide, but so no, I said, no, I can hold it with my hand. I'll be ready for power on when I'm gliding to the touchdown. And all of a sudden, over the radio comes, get that stick down, get that stick down. Then one of the instructors, somebody's in trouble. So I better not touch down. I just give it the power and go up, and now it's safe to look. A BT-13 is on his nose like that. Stalled out, and the guy got killed, and it was Heller, the other weak student.
Wow.
Three of us were bad students. Wow, that was too bad. Anyway, later on they saved my life. We got through basic, and I finally got one compliment. I was so afraid of the other young guys who would sneak off when they could fly by themselves and do all the flying places. They'd meet out there and play like they were fighter pilots. I don't know, you know, you're going to get in trouble if they get caught. So I wouldn't do that. Oh yeah. Now we get to Luke Field Flying School. We'll get our wings in about 2 months. Some guys even ordered their officer's uniform already, which they'll never get to use. But anyway, and they suddenly decided we've got more pilots in training than we need because it looked like a tough war, and we're going to have to cut this class 20%. And I was in that class, guys that got washed out, and they probably saved my life. And so I got an easy job. From then on, I was a steward on military transport planes flying from San Francisco area to Australia and the New Guinea and the South Pacific. And the radio operator used to do this job, but so they put these washed-out cadets on the desk job. Some went to the East Coast and flew the cold Atlantic to England, you know, but I was in the South Pacific, luckily.
I'm going to fast forward a little bit, kind of out of that period of time in your life. And, you know, one of the things that was so interesting when I came to visit your shop was a machine that you made called the Spintron. Do you still use that? Or tell us a little bit about the Spintron.
Yeah. Well, ours was, other people had made them too before. So I said, maybe we better make a little test fixture. And we'll take the saw up ahead and put it on the plate, and a variable speed motor, and and we even bought a strobo tack to make it look like it was standing still at high RPM. And by golly, we learned quite a bit. Later on, we found out we don't even need that strobo tack. We can hear the noise when it's in valve float. And so we tried different springs and different cams, and I remember one time Ed Pink came by. I says, how'd you like to see 10,000 RPM on a Chrysler with those long rocker arms? and he looked at the cam, because we had an eccentric on there. In this case, we wanted to say, how high would an eccentric go in RPM?
Sure.
Because that was pretty gentle, you know. Mm-hmm. So that's the way we were testing. And then later on, back east here, that company that made push rods made the testing machine with a 50 horsepower motor, and they called it the Spintron. They had spin. We just called ours a test fixture, and we bought one of those, and that helped us too. And NASCAR bought them too. Oh. NASCAR needed them, yeah.
So I'm going to fast forward to this event, Ed, and it's been so fun having you here. I'm going to try to go to...
Yeah, these are the guys that hang out. Yeah, Bud Hines was the head of the Bunghole Club, and his dad was a roofer, and Bud Hines was a roofer. Everyone liked him. He has great personality. And we'd all hang out at that roofing company yard. And when his dad come by, he said, you guys are a bunch of a-holes. And we were thinking of calling it the A-hole Club. And Hartford Bridges said, no, you can't use that name. Let me think of a name. And he came up with bungholers. A barrel with a bung on its side, like that.
Well, you know, I don't want to go too much longer, but before, you know, we kind of start wrapping up, I wanted to talk a little bit about your car being here in Nebraska and having it here at the Museum of American Speed. You know, your relationship with us goes back quite a long way, and I remember your first visit to the museum here. That would have been, what, about 6 or 7 years ago that you visited the museum with Doug the last time?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And what's your takeaway of the museum? You know, it obviously means a lot to us.
But wonderful. I just can't believe the things I'll never would have got to see if Bill hadn't collected these things and went out of his way to get them.
Ed, is there any parting words you would say to our crowd? Any words of wisdom or things about you that maybe they don't already know about you?
Well, I'm lucky I've found this hobby, which is so much fun, and such wonderful people are into these cars. They must have been in horse and buggies in the old days. And we got to look into that and see if the horse and buggy guys had meetings together like this. They must have, because... but the thing that was great about it is you learn from the older fellas, and they always seem to be glad to help you. And pretty soon you can help the new guys after you've learned a little bit. And I kind of thought it over one time. I said, you know, some of the guys you might help when they don't know anything, but they got talent, they might go far in this business or hobby in the future, you know. In the beginning, it's good to learn as you go along, and you might stumble onto something good. I was beginning to make a little money in the cam business, flatheads only, and Kenny Harmon came to visit me, Harmon and Collins. Kenny Harmon was a boat racing guy, and how did he learn about cam grinding? Well, evidently, when Winfield told me that George Riley, who made those wonderful cylinder heads, came to him to grind a cam, he was too busy, and he said, you've watched me run the machine, so go ahead and run it yourself. Just pick out a master and see what you can do. So he started coming pretty often. Oh, he came very often? Did he ever consult with you before he built that F-head? Because that was such a good engine for sprint cars, more practical than dual overhead cams and all that. Yeah, he did. He consulted me. What did you tell him? I told him to go ahead and build it. What's he up to? Well, then what happened? Well, when he got it running, he parked it in front of my shop in a Model A Roadster. This might have been the two-port. It might have been the four-port. Must have been a two-port, though. Then what happened? He let me take it around the block. Oh, you're a flathead man, and this is an overhead, or half and half overhead. What'd you think of it? Wasn't as good as my flathead. But later on, Winfield did make overhead valves, heads that were very good. And he put squish into the head, which evidently the overhead valve engines didn't have squish in the early days, and that helped quite a bit. So then George Riley might have hired Kenny Harmon, and later Kenny Harmon got together with a sheepskin engineer named Cliff Collins, and they were big in the cam business then, and Kenny Harmon came to visit me to see what this kid's doing here. So he said, you know, you're just doing flatheads. If you get orders for other cams that you don't do, you could send them to us, and we could grind them for you, and you could make a little money on them. So by golly, the chance comes. A guy sends a V12 Cadillac cam in from about 1933. And I sent it to them, and they grind it, and it goes to Arizona. And all of a sudden, here comes a National Guard guy. He flew the P-80 jet here. He's got the cam with him. This car won't run at all. And we got to thinking, so what, am I going to admit to him that I didn't grind it? And I said, well, I better be honest. I didn't make this cam, and I told him what the deal was. And evidently they put clearance ramps on it, so the valves open way 30 degrees before they're supposed to, and it's a hydraulic cam, one of the very first hydraulic cams, it and the V16 Cadillac. So by golly, I'm stuck. He's on my doorstep. That's that cam fix. Well, I read about what I read in the book. There's hardly any clearance ramp on a hydraulic cam, and I was able to, through my other masters, I was able to regrind it for him and take off those clearance ramps, and never heard from him again. So I didn't realize, all the cam grinders knew that hydraulics are no good for racing. Boy, they're nice and quiet, but they're no good for racing. Well, that was because the 39 the 49 O's and CAD, when they came out with hydraulic tappets, but they came out with a fast action, short timing, high torque cam, good for a little over 4,000 RPM. And there wasn't much knowledge about overhead valve soft action cams, except Winfield did know. And so then I was forced into something by accident. The oil-cooled V6 Vega came out, and the guy, I made it mechanical because all the cam guys, except Winfield maybe, they're no good, hydraulics are no good for racing. So I put clearance ramps on it and told the guy to adjust them at a certain clearance, and he came over and it was a thrashing machine. It was terrible. He says, you adjust those tappets. I said, have you tried zero clearance when cold? Oh, I've tried everything. I said, gee, and that engine was dead quiet and silent when it was, yeah. I said, well, we got to go hydraulic. And we made him one, and he was happy by just taking off the clearance ramps. It was so simple. And I said, gee, he didn't come back. Let's try that on the dyno. And pretty soon we're going 6,500 RPM with hydraulics, and no one would believe it.
Wow.
And it took about a year before they realized it wasn't a publicity stunt. We really, with the softer action, we could go to the higher RPM.
Wow. Just experimentation and trying new things and stumbling on things by accident.
Sometimes it's so simple, yeah, sometimes.
One more round of applause for our great friend, Mr. Iskenderian.
Oh, thank you very much. You've been good to me. Thank you.